Welcome back to another episode of Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes. I'm the Chief Sales Sergeant here at Bulletproof Selling and author of the book, Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. Now, here at Bulletproof Selling, we believe that hope is not a sales strategy. And so for more than a year, more than 90 episodes, we've been coming to you week after week after week to help remove hope from how you sell. Now, I've been able to address more than 30,000 salespeople over the last decade. And of all of those salespeople, each one of them was relying on hope more than they should, relying on hope that the prospect got back to them, that the thing that they sent would be wowed, received, embraced, that it would help generate a sale. But we find so often that if we're relying on hope, then we are allowing our sales to be handed off to a force that we don't want them to be. So if you're in sales right now, and if you're listening to this podcast, my guess is you're in sales. This is the podcast for you. If you are dedicated to growing your business, if you're dedicated to selling more, to serving more, to providing more value to prospects, then Bulletproof Selling is the right place for you. Because over the best-selling authors, Hall of Fame speakers, sales leaders that we've been able to interview, every one of these episodes, we build a sales system with our guests so that you can use it immediately, no matter the size of your team or the size of your goals. Now, it's rare that on this show, I bring back the same person twice. It's happened once or twice, but it's even rarer that I choose another person from the same organization as one of our guests, because I love meeting different people with different perspectives. But when I interviewed the president of a company called Central Metric, I realized that these folks understand what it is to remove hope. How do I know that? Because they're all about systems. They go into organizations, into companies, and they help them develop systems across their operations and their sales team. Well, as that aligns so closely with what I do for sales teams, I definitely wanted to bring on another one of their team members. And of course, it's always a blessing. It's always an honor to bring on another military veteran, because I don't have to convince them of the value of systems in operations. These folks get it at a root level. Why? Because we've had to use systems to keep ourselves alive in very dangerous places. And so without further ado, I want to bring on today's guest, Mr. Ryan Johns.
Hey there, Sean. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here. Can't wait to dive into the conversation, man.
Cool. So with us having already interviewed somebody from Central Metric, tell us a little bit about your unique role there, who you serve, and how you go about providing value to sales teams.
Yeah, so my role is more corporate strategy, infrastructure design. Sebastian being the president, he's more on the revenue side of things, business development, partnerships. I'm the process guy, right? I'm the guy that comes in and standardizes, because I understand that just time is of the essence, right? And we don't want to waste resources, capital, time, whatever that resource may be. We want to be able to execute effectively with minimal waste. So that's really my role, is just make sure from an internal perspective and from a customer delivery perspective, we're delivering measurable value in an efficient way.
Love it. And tell us a little bit about your military service so we have some background on that.
Yeah, man, I served way back in the day, 96 to 2000. Had I known then what I know now, I probably would have served much longer. Had I had mentorship and guidance and things of that nature. But Air Force veteran, it was awesome to serve. Probably the most, they were foundation establishing years for me. I worked in the Air Education Training Command, so all the pilots that came through the Air Force to learn to fly, they came through us, right? We were kind of their right hand, and we had to learn to problem solve, work with them critically, right? And if there was flight line emergencies and things like that, we had to resolve pretty quickly, right? And we're talking international students, so students from all over. So communication was a big piece of that, right? And so those were the foundational skills that I think I learned probably, over 20 years ago, and just continue to build upon them the best I can.
And so you've talked about process and how the Air Force kind of gave that to you, taught you how to leverage it in training. And I bet that you bring that in some small way, shape, or form to every engagement that you have. So I'm curious to get your answer to a question then, because I get to coach salespeople all over the country, all over the world. And a lot of them are high performers, or they probably wouldn't be employed when I show up. And so the question that we often have, especially as organizations are implementing a new CRM, let's say, a salesperson would say, well, Sean, I'm already performing. I'm doing it my way. I'm using an Excel spreadsheet, or I'm using a checklist, or I've got this paper binder that I carry around with me, and all my stuff is there. And you're asking me to implement a process that every other salesperson is being asked to use too. Why? If I'm already performing, what would be your answer? Because I'm sure you run into that question just like I do.
Absolutely. I asked them to better qualify what performing means, right? Because
Mm,
that's a bit of a subjective term. So when you say I'm performing or I'm having success, compared to what, right? My mentality is always playing the infinite game of optimization. So I want to perform at an optimal level. So it's one thing to perform and have success, but are you maximizing that ability and that potential, right? And so that never stops. And so that's just how I live my life. And that's how I coach reps as well, is focused on playing the infinite game of innovation and optimization, not just performing. Performing is a low bar to me.
it is, and you think about our time in the military. Performing would mean, maybe you brought everybody home from a mission. Maybe
Yeah.
that's performing, right? But did it
Yeah.
accomplish the mission, or was it a waste of resources? Well, if we brought everybody home, that's a measure of success, but it's probably not the measure of success, because there's inherent risk in combat, just like there's an inherent risk in sales. I might be rejected. This prospect, I may end up doing business with them, and they may end up being a terrible customer. And so I need to have systems in place to, one, make sure I don't lose the sale, do I have everything in my power, but then also to qualify, to vet, to make sure this prospect is the right fit for the business model that I'm in. So I make sure that I'm actually leading a life that I enjoy, instead of just being miserable, because I don't think anybody has time for that anymore. So,
Yeah.
Ryan, then I'm curious, then when you go into an organization, you're showing up, salespeople are doing things their way. There might be a little bit of a process, but obviously they're bringing you in to help optimize that process. Where do you see salespeople relying on hope more than they should, more often than not, when you show up and begin coaching a team?
Oh man, one thing that I'm seeing now is sales reps are over reliant on product demonstration. They're assuming that a product's features and benefits are just going to resonate with their audience, right? And
Mm,
it all depends on who you're talking to, because again, we work with a lot of um, sales tech companies, right? And the process is much more complex, right? And there's often multiple stakeholders, right? Multiple, even there's not even one decision maker anymore. It's like decision by committee, right?
mm,
And they assume that I'm talking to the right person. They're hoping they're talking to the right person, and they're hoping that their value pitch and their story resonates with that particular person. And
mm,
they're not having dialogue. They're not having that exchange of meaning between them and that particular prospect or customer, right? Because I always tell people sales is an exchange of value. And if I don't
mm.
understand what value means to Sean, how can I have a value exchange or a value discussion? You know what I mean? Like, how can I position my product or my service as valuable if I don't understand what that means to you? That's
Mm.
where I think they're missing it a lot.
That's really deep, because you think of the sales cycle. If we've gotten to the product demonstration, then we've at least convinced them that, hey, maybe this might be worth my time, whether that's on the first call or the 10th call. And yet the idea of providing value, even during the product demo, whether they end up purchasing from me or not, that they leave better educated, better informed, better able to reach their goals, that would be a heck of a promise to make. And I'm thinking, even as a perspective of a buyer from me, right? If you called me up and said, Sean, I want to show you this thing that's going to help you grow your business, whether you end up buying it or not, you're going to be better off for these reasons. I'd be a hell of a lot more likely to listen to that product demo, to watch it, to have you come visit my offices. So let's build a sales system around this, Ryan, because I think it would actually help salespeople. But to begin with it, before we start actually system building here, let's talk about value, because in the world of sales, that's something that really is misunderstood. So, how do I define value or discover value from a prospect before I even get into the product demo?
Yeah, I mean, it would fall within your discovery needs analysis process, right? That's what I always ask people, like, what's the most important
Mm,
stage of sales? It's the discovery, right? It's understanding how are things today? What's the current condition, right? How does that impact you? Who else does it impact? Can we measure it? Um, and how is that, like, these are what I call customer value impact metrics, right? Quantifying the current state. If you can't quantify the current state of the business, then how do you map to the future state? And how do you know the
Mm.
delta between current and future state, right? And so that's what I think sales reps have to get better at is level setting on what value is, what matters to you as a customer, how do you measure success, right? And then we can get on the same page and determine is this a fit or not? Because it may not be a fit, but you want to understand that sooner than later. But it all starts with a good discovery.
So I'd be willing to bet then that helping your prospect understand the state of where they're at in a new way would be a great way to provide value at the outset and also help you as a salesperson say, we have to understand where we're at as a benchmark because maybe this product isn't a good fit if you're way up here at a 10 and this product really brings companies from 3 to 7, right? I'm not going to waste your time with it in that case, but I have to understand for myself as a salesperson what that benchmark is. And if I can help better educate you as a prospect industry wide on where you fit against other organizations like you, that's value in and of itself. So let's definitely circle back to that because that's going to be really important for the systems build. So Ryan, you remember from the military, everything has an acronym. I can't think of anything that we didn't turn into an acronym, even if it probably shouldn't have been an acronym. Well, when we talk about systems building here at Bulletproof Selling, we're trimming hope away from sales with every new system that we implement. And I'm sure this is something you see great organizations do as well. So we use the acronym TRIM, TRIM. The T in TRIM for this systems build is the trigger, because just like in the military, when I'm training a pilot for an engine flameout, that's probably not the right, a system to execute if I'm still on the runway. Unlikely to have an engine flame out at 30,000 feet on the runway. I'm sure it could happen, but it's rare. So we need to make sure we understand where to pull this system off the shelf and begin using it. So if I'm developing a product demo that's going to provide value before, during, and after in a way that my prospect's going to leave better educated, better informed, when do I trigger this system? Is it when I'm in front of that prospect? Is it when I'm developing the demo and practicing it? When I'm developing a checklist of value? Where do I pull this system off the shelf in the sales cycle to make sure that I'm using it at the right time?
The earlier, the better.
Oh,
The earlier, the better, right? Because once you get to the demo stage, I mean, that's more of a validation step, right? But if you don't have knowledge and understanding of what's either broken or what the customer desires to optimize and the impact it's having on the organization, if you can't quantify that, then there's really no solution, or it's a very ambiguous, nebulous solution, right?
hmm.
And again, that goes back to the hope and the assumption. I think there's so many just unsubstantiated assumptions that sellers go into their engagements with. Like, don't assume, validate. I mean, it's okay to assume, but just validate the assumption, right? Assumptions are okay, but just don't continue throughout their process without validation and alignment.
So if my trigger is wrapping my head around the assumption, how do I uncover or discover the assumption that I'm walking into the prospect situation with? Because what I think is important may not be what my prospect thinks is important. And if I'm selling on me rather than their challenges, we're going to have a misalignment right out of the gate. So how do I uncover or discover my prospect assumptions as the trigger element for this system?
Yeah, I think there's just a series of questions. What we do is we create a discovery model for all of our clients, right? And so it gives you 5 to 10 must-have questions that you have to understand before proceeding into
Mm,
that engagement, right? And I think that's just one of those things where I've even seen enterprise companies, man, they don't have a standard framework for discovery. And if you don't standardize certain elements of your process, how can you assess quality? How do you know the qualitative execution of it? Because there's too many different variables, right? We don't
yeah.
know what makes Ryan successful or what makes Sean successful and what's really driving his deal forward. So that standard framework up front is going to be critical.
I love it. So if I'm doing this as early as possible with my 5 or 10 or 15 questions, and for each industry, it's probably going to be a little different depending on what you're selling, length of your sales cycle, complexity of the sale. But I've got those discovery questions so that I can at least discover, uncover, validate assumptions.
Mhm.
Is there anything else that I need to do ahead of time to prep this before we move into the tactics of delivering a product presentation, a service demo that's going to provide more value than anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great prep tools is to understand the persona you're talking to, right? Because
Mm,
there's certain personas when you're talking to the C-suite, senior leaders, executive leaders, they are focused on strategic outcomes, right? So your conversation needs to be focused there. It needs to be high level profitability focus, accelerating time to revenue, things like that. Now, if you're talking to someone that is a tactical person that would actually use your software, it's a different conversation. These are tactical outcome focuses, right? But at the end of the day, I just simplify it this way. Every business, and you tell me your thoughts on this, but I look for commonality. Every business that I work with globally is trying to solve for one of three things, typically, or maybe all three. They want to accelerate their time to a particular outcome, right? Speed, efficiency, lean, like they want to speed that up. Number two, they want to improve process efficiency in some way, right? That will reduce cost and improve outcomes, or they want to mitigate risk. It could be financial risk, it could be whatever, legal risk, whatever. Those are the big three. And so what I always tell people is start your questioning in those three lanes: process efficiency, accelerating time to an outcome, or mitigating risk, right? Those are the big three, and everything else kind of falls underneath those. It just makes it a lot easier.
That helps us set a little industry benchmark with this particular prospect on where they're at, what they're looking to achieve. And obviously, one of those three is going to probably be a percentage or more higher than the others. And that may be where we want to spend more time, because that's what's going to be top of mind for our prospects. So if we've got the trigger element handled, now we're moving into the R and trim, which is making this thing repeatable. So just like in the military, I want to follow the same process steps so I can learn them, I can train them, I can be more present in the moment and let kind of my auto memory, my unconscious, all the fun things that we know humans have, really play out those steps while I'm pivoting in the moment, which is required on every sales call, just like it's required on every combat mission. So what are the 5 things, let's say, that I can do during my product demo that allow me to deliver value to this prospect, whether they buy from me or not?
During the demo itself, I think, well, one, your demo needs to be tailored and based on the business cases you've built, right? You can't just do a blanket demo. I want to show you features or benefits that align with the specific areas that we were able to capture during our needs analysis that are, again, translate to value for you. And that's all I want to focus on, right? And so I think that's the biggest thing, because there's an abundance of tools out there, and but they're not being quantitatively mapped back to customer value, like showing them specifically, this is where our tool interacts and accelerates your path to that outcome you're looking for.
Okay, so we've got show them specific case studies that really map out to the goal that they have, whether it's risk mitigation, growth, efficiency. What are 2 or 3 more things that I can do during that product demo, or questions I can ask, or information I can gather? Because the product demo doesn't just occur during the product demo, of course. We can still provide value afterwards. So what are 2 to 3 things that I can be asking about, questioning, writing down, so that I can provide more value to that prospect than anyone else doing a similar demo?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, continue to ask for agreement, gain agreement throughout, right? And is the value measurable, right? I always ask, who does this new process or solution impact? How does it impact them? And how does it tie back to either revenue growth, risk mitigation, process improvement? So just constantly tying those back to one another, I think, is really big. And just waiting, being okay with silence. I've seen a lot of product demos where it's one thing after the other, like rapid fire, and not checking in with the customer to make sure that we're still in agreement and we're still on the same page, and they're seeing what they're expecting to see. And not even just case studies, but I mean, I would say just make it as specific to their environment as possible, making them feel like, hey, this is a custom experience. This is not the demo that you run for everyone else.
And I love the idea of encouraging them to look at ripple effects of the decision that they're going to make. So even if they don't purchase, well, here are the people in your world that's going to immediately affect. And here are some of those secondary and tertiary effects. And if you decide to purchase, here are the people around you that this is going to affect. So it's not just them looking at it from their seat in the organization. It's saying, well, if I make this decision, my marketing team is going to be affected in this way, and my product development team is going to be affected in this way, or my delivery team or my customers are going to be affected in these ways. So it's great to encourage people to look at tertiary and further on effects. I'm sure there are a couple of them we can look at. So we've got the trigger element, making this thing repeatable through a couple of steps that encourage us to look at not just the product demo that we're thinking we're going to deliver to everybody, but to customize it, to encourage people to look just beyond their immediate impact to the impact it could have on their organization. Now we're into the I in trim, which is making this thing improvable. So you're a firm believer in system and process. Well, in the military, we had to improve the way that we were fighting, improve the way that we were training pilots, because after World War I, they weren't just in biplanes anymore, right? Now they're in jets. So we had to improve the training to make sure that the systems kept up with the times. So how am I looking at improving a product demo to make sure that it continues to provide value given a market change that may happen next month, given an economy downturn that might happen soon? What are the things I could be doing to improve this system quarter after quarter?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I had this conversation with someone else. I think there needs to be a quarterly market analysis, right? There needs to be ongoing research. It doesn't stop because the market now, right, is so dynamic and it's diverse and it changes so quickly. And so I don't think that you can just do a one-time TAM analysis or whatever, and you think that's good for 2 to 3 years. There needs to be constant engagement, constant research being done. I think even conversations like this, I mean, we learn so much from one another in our respective, spheres of influence. And I think the other thing, just to go back to the other point around repeatability and making sure the demo is optimized, one thing that's being missed is people aren't documenting our customers' workflow. And everybody may not have a formal workflow, but there's always a process that we go through each day, right, to get to our end result. That's where a lot of hidden problems lie, are within that process, right? But and everyone has a different one. So I think better documenting each customer's individual workflow and then quantifying each stage of that workflow is going to be very, very important. And you got to visualize that too. That's a big piece. Like we don't visualize that part of the business, because a lot of what we sell, it is improving the process, or we claim it will, but we got to show that, right? And then when it comes to measuring, like showing the improvement, the improvable component, if you don't measure or capture the baseline, you're never going to show that, right? You're never going to be able to articulate and demonstrate the improvement if you don't know where they started. That's why I said before, it's so important to understand the current state, document and measure the current state, and then you can see the delta between that state and the future state, and that's where your value resides, right in that middle ground.
And maybe a step to then insert into the repeatable part is to have that prospect walk through the workflow that gets them to the end result thereafter, or that helps them mitigate the workflow they're currently using to mitigate that problem, if that's the focus they're on. And as an expert, hopefully as a solution provider, you could immediately be able to see a couple of areas that your product, your service could step in and make that more efficient, faster, all the fun things that we know that we're here to deliver for our prospects. So love that. We got trigger, repeatable, improvable. You touched on it just now, but if I'm taking the time to map this out, to develop it, to do my quarterly market analysis, I got to make sure that this is a better use of my time than whatever I was doing before, which means I need to measure results. So the M in trim is measure. How am I going to measure the effectiveness of a product demo when I've removed it's always a good idea. Does this product demo convert clients? Yes, but that's a lagging indicator. Product demo is still part of the leading sales cycle, right? These are the things that I'm doing up until the point of sale. So how am I measuring this along the way to make sure that it's better than what I was doing before?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's going to be dependent upon what the outcome you desire is, right? But I think it needs to be incremental. So what we do is we measure every month. Let's take sales velocity, for instance. Most companies aren't measuring sales velocity. Like, how quickly am I getting from stage 1, 2, 3, and 4 to close, right? And what's holding me back? What's creating lag within my process? So I think, again, it goes back to the workflow mapping piece. That's a lost science. You have to measure every stage in order to understand the big picture and how your solution is going to impact that, accelerate that process or not. But yeah, it's you got to get beneath the surface metrics. That's for sure. And I think measuring it in stages, analyzing it in stages, is the key to doing that. And that's just a lost science today for salespeople, at least.
So I see two things to measure then. One is to measure and help your prospect understand how to measure each aspect of their workflow, because
Yes,
you're going to
because
see
they don't.
opportunity for improvement.
Yes.
Yeah, nobody
Yeah.
does, right? You and I wouldn't
They-
be in business
yes.
if people did this more often, because I know it's exactly the service that we provide. So to do that for the prospect, help them understand, better map, put timelines or at least benchmarks around. Listen, it may take us 2 straight weeks to figure out the math around how fast you're moving from A to B, but the industry benchmark is 2.7 days. Maybe that's enough value for the prospect to understand, geez, I'm way behind the power curve on that. That's value. And then to also be measuring on our end the aspect of our sales cycle where the product demo fits in, so that we're measuring, hey, does this thing accelerate or add velocity to my sales cycle? Because if I'm providing more value than anyone else and I'm doing this in a way that helps my prospects see things that no one else can help them see, that should be accelerating my sales cycle. So if it is doing that, then we know we're on the right path. Well,
Yes.
right, in just short period of time we built a sales system for a product demo that's going to actually provide value to prospects, whether they buy from us or not. Now, that's something that I think any salesperson out there can go and use. And I want to give them time to get out there and use it. So we've talked about central metric before, but how do we get deeper into your world and the central metrics world? If people want to continue this conversation with you, how do they do that?
LinkedIn is the best way, man. I live on LinkedIn. I'm there every day, putting up content weekly. You can find Ryan K. Johns on LinkedIn, or you can go to rkjohnsconsulting.com, or you can go to centralmetric.tech. A number of different ways, but LinkedIn is probably the fastest way. I typically respond to all messages through LinkedIn.
Well, so if you're an organization out there, you're a sales leader, and you want to know how process improvement could actually affect and influence what your people are doing, and especially what your prospects are doing, definitely reach out to Ryan. I know he'd be happy to have that conversation with you. So for all of us here in the Bulletproof Selling world, make sure you're following us on LinkedIn as well. We're active there 5 days a week for sure. Every one of these conversations, of course, archived on YouTube. If you want to go back in the archives and find just about any sales system, we have more than 90 of them now. So stretches from one end of the sales cycle to the other. It's all there, absolutely free. And of course, if you're listening to this, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, make sure you're subscribing to these podcasts for more sales systems to help you replace hope with certainty. You want to read these in the long form version, you're old school like me, you want to read them bullet point by bullet point, you can find them all at bulletproofselling.us. Well, Sean Rhodes here. It's been a pleasure serving the sales community alongside you, Ryan. Let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.